You ever see someone turn an everyday object like a mop into a weapon? Not in a movie, not in a comic book, but in real life. What happened that day in the training hall left everyone frozen, because a single snap of wood said more than any words ever could. See, this isn't just some random funny moment in class. This is a story about fear, respect, and the fine line between control and chaos. It started with a simple request from the instructor. He asked for a close combat demo. What he got was a human student who wasn't supposed to stand out snapping a mop handle in half like it was nothing. And that moment, small as it looked, sent a shockwave through the room. But let's rewind a little. Because for this to make sense, you need to understand the stage where this all unfolded. The training hall wasn't built for comfort. Think less modern gym and more underground fight club meets military boot camp. The floor was scuffed from years of drills. Sweat had seeped so deep into the mats they carried a permanent stain. The walls had dense reminders of training accidents that probably weren't accidents. And in the center of it all stood the instructor. He wasn't some soft-spoken, friendly coach. No, he was the kind of man who carried his scars like medals. Rumor was, he served in 3 different campaigns before being brought in to train the next generation. His voice had the weight of a man who didn't ask, he ordered, and when he ordered, people moved. Now, on this particular day, the class was restless. Everyone could feel it. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the tension of knowing evaluations were around the corner. But the instructor could smell weakness like blood in the water. He knew morale was slipping, and that's when he called for a demonstration. Close combat, he barked. I want to see it. No hesitation. No wasted motion. Everyone froze, because when he said demonstration, he didn't mean some choreographed show. He meant raw, unfiltered technique under pressure. He scanned the room like a hawk, eyes slicing through the ranks of students. And then they landed on him, the human. Now, here's the thing about this guy. Up until this moment, nobody paid him much attention. He wasn't the tallest in the group. He didn't brag about his strength. He wasn't even from the same background as the rest. Most of the trainees were hardened recruits, handpicked for discipline and potential. A human, he was an outsider, a volunteer. Some thought of him as filler, the kind of person instructors use to make others look better. But the instructor's gaze lingered on him just long enough to make everyone shift uncomfortably. You, he said, step forward. The human didn't flinch, didn't protest. He just walked forward with the kind of calm that made people uneasy. The kind of calm that says, I don't need to prove anything to you, but I will, if you ask. The instructor scanned the room for a weapon to use in the demo. There were training knives, padded sticks, and even a few steel bars on the rack. But his hand landed on something else, a mop, leaning against the corner of the wall. Its wooden handle was worn smooth from years of cleaning. Perfect. He tossed it at the human. This'll do. Show us what close combat looks like. The room erupted in quiet laughter, not loud, but the kind of chuckles that spread like wildfire. A mop, really, against trained recruits. It was almost insulting. But that's exactly why the instructor did it. He wanted to see how the human would react to mockery, to being underestimated. The human caught the mop mid-air. He didn't laugh, didn't frown, just studied it for a second. And then, slowly, he walked to the center of the mat. The room grew quiet again. Everyone leaned forward, expecting him to hold the mop like a staff, maybe spin it around and put on some kind of flashy show. But instead, he did something nobody expected. He gripped the mop handle firmly, planted his feet, and with one sharp motion crack, the wood split clean in half. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the hall. Conversations died mid-whisper. The laughter evaporated. Even the instructor's face twitched just slightly. Now, to most people, breaking a mop handle doesn't sound like much. But here's what everyone in that room understood in that single moment. That mop wasn't designed to break easily. The wood was old, compact, dense. Anyone who had ever tried to snap something like that before knew it took raw strength, precise leverage, and a complete lack of hesitation. This wasn't just strength. This was intent. The human didn't snap the mop because he was angry. He didn't do it to show off. He did it to prove a point. Give me anything, and I'll turn it into a weapon. Even your doubt. Even your laughter. The silence that followed was heavy. It pressed down on the room like gravity. For the first time, the students weren't looking at the instructor. They were looking at the human, and the instructor who had built his career on breaking recruits down until they begged for mercy, saw something he didn't expect. Not defiance, not arrogance, but control. The human dropped the broken pieces of the mop onto the mat. The sound was final, like the closing of a book. Then he stepped back, hands loose at his sides, as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew something had happened. A line had been drawn, not with words, but with action. And that's just the beginning. Because what happened next turned that quiet training hall into the center of a story that spread far beyond its walls. A story about how ordinary, underestimated humans could take the smallest thing and turn it into something unforgettable. The sound of the mop breaking didn't just echo in the training hall, it echoed in people's heads. Students who'd been slouching were now sitting straighter. Even the air felt tighter, like everyone had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it go. The instructor's eyes stayed locked on the human. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. Silence was his favorite tool, it stretched out like wire pulled tight, daring someone to flinch. One of the recruits couldn't handle it. He whispered, just loud enough for the row to hear, "It's just a mop." But the instructor's head snapped toward him so fast, you'd think he'd grown a second pair of ears. The recruit shrank back immediately. No one else dared laugh. The instructor turned back to the human, expression unreadable. "Interesting," he said, voice flat. He walked a slow circle round the broken pieces on the mat, like a predator pacing prey. Then, without warning, he stopped and barked, "Pick it up." The human bent down, collected the two halves of the mop, and held one in each hand. "Now show us." "Show us." 2 words, heavy with challenge. The instructor wasn't letting this slide. Snapping a mop might have stunned the class, but now the human had to prove it wasn't just some party trick. The human nodded once. His grip shifted one piece forward like a short sword, the other angled back like a club. He didn't twirl them or try to look flashy. His stance was simple, efficient, and most importantly calm. The instructor raised a hand and pointed at one of the recruits. "You step forward." The recruit hesitated. He glanced at the human, then back at the instructor. Everyone knew what was about to happen. A test. Not friendly sparring, a test of grit. The recruit obeyed, stepping into the center of the mat. He was taller than the human, broader too. His shoulders looked like they'd been carved from stone, his fists clenched, veins visible under the skin. The instructor's voice cut through the silence. "Attack." The recruit charged. What happened next was so fast, some people swore later they didn't even see it properly. The recruit swung a heavy fist straight for the human's jaw, but the human shifted, not backward, not to dodge. He stepped in. One of the mop halves cracked against the recruit's wrist, redirecting the punch off course. The other half came up under the recruit's chin, stopping just shy of impact. The recruit froze, eyes wide, because if that mop piece had landed, his jaw would have been shattered. The instructor's eyebrows lifted just barely. The human lowered the mop pieces and stepped back. The recruit rubbed his wrist, wincing, and retreated without a word. The room erupted in whispers, not mocking this time, curiosity, suspicion. Something had shifted. Because here's the truth. Anyone can be strong, anyone can get lucky. But what they saw was control, precision. The human hadn't flailed or panicked. He'd dismantled the attack like it was math. And the instructor knew it. He wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. Again, he barked, this time pointing to 2 recruits. Together, gasps rippled across the room, 2 against 1 with broken sticks. That wasn't a demonstration, that was a test designed to humiliate. But the human didn't argue. He simply reset his stance. The recruits moved in, circling, one lunged low, the other high. Classic pincer move. For a split second it looked like the human was about to be overwhelmed. But then crack, crack, the first mop half smashed into the low attacker's knee. The second whipped across, catching the other's forearm before his strike could land. Both recruits stumbled back, off balance, struggling to recover. And just like that, the human stood alone in the center again, breathing steady, face unreadable. The instructor's jaw flexed. Not anger, not amusement, something more dangerous, interest. Because for the first time in years, he saw something in a trainee he hadn't expected. A spark, not just strength, not just skill, a mindset. The other students weren't sure what to think. Some were impressed, some were scared. A few even looked jealous. But one thing was clear, no one was laughing anymore, and the human, he didn't raise his chin in pride. He didn't smirk. He simply dropped the mop halves again and said quietly, "Anything can be a weapon, if you know how to use it." That line stuck. It crawled under their skin and stayed there. The instructor finally spoke, voice low but carrying across the hall. "Not bad, but words are cheap. Let's see how long you last." And with that, he pointed again, not to 2 recruits, not 3, but 5. The room erupted. 5 against 1, that wasn't training, that was punishment. Everyone knew it. The recruits hesitated, waiting for someone to object, but the instructor's glare silenced them. 5 trainees stepped onto the mat. The human didn't move, didn't blink. He just bent down, picked up the mop halves again, and rolled his shoulders. The room was dead silent, because what everyone was about to see wasn't just a fight. It was a test of limits, a test of control, a test of whether the human was just a fluke, or something more. And as the 5 recruits spread out, circling like wolves around their prey, one thought pulsed in everyone's head: he's not supposed to win this. But deep down, some of them weren't so sure anymore. 5 pairs of eyes locked on the human. The training hall's air grew heavier, thick like a storm about to break. Everyone watching knew what this meant. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about survival and proving a point. The instructor folded his arms, lips tight, saying nothing. He wanted to see the truth stripped bare. No excuses, no luck, no accidents. Just ability. The recruits circled wider, trying to box the human in. Their boots scuffed against the mat, slow, deliberate, like wolves testing their prey. The human didn't flinch. His gaze tracked them calmly, shoulders loose, grip light on the mop halves. He looked more like someone about to sketch a line on paper than fight for his skin. The first attack came sudden and sharp. One recruit lunged from the left, fist slicing through the air. The human pivoted, letting the strike graze harmlessly past as he brought one mop half crashing down on the man's forearm. A crack of pain, a grunt, and the recruit staggered back, clutching his arm. But no time to breathe. 2 more recruits charged together, one aiming low, the other high. The human moved like water splitting around a rock. He sidestepped a low strike, spinning the mop half backward to smack the attacker's ribs. At the same time, the other half swung up, catching the second recruit's wrist mid-punch and redirecting it wide. The crowd gasped, but 3 were still standing, and now they moved as one. They rushed in together, trying to overwhelm him with sheer force. A punch, a kick, a tackle attempt chaos. The human ducked low, dropped a shoulder, and rolled beneath a wild swing. He came up in the middle of the group, mop halves snapping outward like twin lightning strikes. One clipped a jaw, the other raked across knuckles. Shouts, stumbles, bodies colliding into each other. For a heartbeat, the fight dissolved into disorder. And in that heartbeat, the human stepped clear, stance reset, breathing steady. It wasn't strength that held him up. It wasn't even speed. It was rhythm. He fought like he could hear the music underneath the chaos, slipping in and out of openings the others didn't even notice. But the recruits weren't finished. Anger burned hotter than pain. They regrouped, faces tight with frustration. This time, they didn't rush in alone. They exchanged quick looks, nods, coordination. The human saw it instantly. His lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile anyone had seen from him, because coordination meant predictability, and predictability meant openings. They attacked again. One lunged high, another swept low, the others pressing in to trap him. The human didn't retreat. He surged forward, right into the heart of it. His mop half smashed down on the sweeping leg, killing its momentum, while his shoulder rammed into the high attacker's chest. Both staggered back, lines broken. Now he turned sharp, fast 2 mop strikes in quick succession, tapping one recruit's temple and another's ribs. Not killing blows, not even full strength, but enough to drop them gasping to their knees. That left 3. The hall was electric now. Whispers flew. Some students leaned forward, eyes wide, others sat frozen. What they were watching wasn't just a fight. It was a statement. One recruit, breathing hard, roared and charged. The human sidestepped neatly, letting the man's momentum carry him past. The mop half clipped the back of his knee, and he went tumbling forward with a shout. To left, they circled, more cautious now. Sweat dripped down their temples. Fear crept in where confidence had been. They knew they couldn't win, not like this, but pride wouldn't let them quit. They attacked together, desperate, reckless. One threw a punch, the other aimed a kick. The human ducked, spun, and with 2 clean motions, ended it. One mop half smacked the puncher's ribs, the other jabbed into the kicker's thigh. Both stumbled, both went down. Silence. The fight was over. The 5 recruits lay scattered, groaning, clutching bruises, rubbing wrists and knees. The human stood alone, mop halves dangling loosely at his sides. His chest rose and fell, but not hard. He wasn't exhausted. He wasn't even rattled. He looked at the instructor. For a long moment, no one dared speak. Then the instructor stepped forward, boots heavy on the mat. He studied the human up and down, expression still unreadable. Then, finally, he said one word: enough. The human nodded once and let the mop halves fall. They clattered against the mat, split wood echoing through the silent hall. The instructor's eyes swept across the rest of the class. What did you see? No one answered. Fear of saying the wrong thing kept mouths shut. So he answered for them. Control, efficiency, and a truth you'd all better learn before you leave this room. Weapons don't make warriors. Warriors make weapons. The words landed like hammers. The human didn't look proud. He didn't strut or bask in attention. He just stepped back to his spot, face calm, hands relaxed. But inside every student's mind, a seed had been planted. Some seeds were respect, some were jealousy, and some, especially in the instructors, were questions. Because what they had just seen wasn't normal. Not in a training hall, not with a mop, not against 5 armed bodies. The human had turned the impossible into something terrifyingly simple, and that meant the instructor had to ask himself, if this is what he can do with broken wood, what would he do with real steel? The recruits were still on the ground when the instructor took a single step forward. The sound of his boot heel striking the mat cut through the quiet like a Judge Esquivel. Every head turned toward him, no one spoke. Not the fallen recruits, not the bystanders, not even the human. The instructor's eyes locked on him, unblinking, cold. For the first time all session, his hands flexed open and shut. Not nervous, not fidgeting, measuring, weighing, deciding. You, he said, voice low, steady. With me it wasn't a request. The air shifted instantly. Whispers rippled through the hall. Everyone knew what it meant. If the instructor fought you, it wasn't training anymore. It was judgment. The human didn't flinch. He gave a single nod, stepped forward, and picked up the mop halves again. The instructor shook his head. No, empty hands. The mop sticks dropped. The human straightened. His eyes, dark and sharp, never left the man across from him. The recruits scrambled out of the way, forming a wide circle around the mat. The hall had become an arena. One of the younger trainees whispered, "He's dead." Another muttered, "Shut up and watch." The instructor rolled his shoulders. He was built like iron, years of drills, campaigns, and battles carved into muscle and scar. This wasn't just some teacher testing form. This was a veteran, a man who had broken bones on real battlefields. He raised his hands into a guard, body angled, weight balanced, every motion clean, efficient, honed, razor sharp. The human mirrored none of it. He simply stood loose, arms relaxed at his sides. He looked like he wasn't even ready to fight, but the instructor knew better. He had seen enough to recognize the danger in that stillness. The silence stretched. Then the instructor moved, fast, a sharp jab, straight and precise, aimed for the human's face. The human's head tilted a fraction, and the punch cut air. Instantly, a hook followed. The human's arm came up, deflecting, redirecting. No block, no clash, just a smooth, tiny adjustment. The instructor pressed harder. A knee snapped up, a fist swung low, a sudden feint into a real strike. Every attack sharp, calculated, meant to overwhelm. The human slipped between them, ducking, weaving, stepping aside by inches. The strikes missed by hairbreadths, grazing fabric but never skin. The recruits watching were frozen. It was like watching a man dance inside a hurricane without getting wet. But the instructor wasn't smiling. His face stayed hard, eyes narrowing. Each miss made him sharper, faster, more dangerous. He wasn't holding back anymore. Finally, his palm shot forward, open, aiming for the human's chest, a strike that could rattle ribs if it landed. The human didn't retreat. He stepped into it. The palm brushed his shoulder, sliding harmlessly past as his body turned. At the same moment, his hand snapped up, not to strike, but to tap the instructor's throat. Just a brush, no more than a whisper. The hall went dead silent, because everyone knew what that meant. If he had wanted to, the instructor would be on the ground. The instructor froze. His eyes locked on the human's, and for the first time in years, his jaw clenched, not from anger but from realization. This man wasn't just skilled, he was dangerous in a way that didn't make sense. No wasted motion, no panic, no hesitation. The human stepped back, lowering his hand. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat. He simply returned to stillness, waiting. The instructor's chest rose and fell. Then, slowly, he reset his stance. Again, he attacked harder this time. Combinations, sudden shifts, bursts of speed that had broken countless fighters before. His strikes landed like hammers, each one loud, each one sharp. But again and again, the human moved just enough. Not more, not less, just enough. A parry here, a sidestep there. The rhythm was uncanny, like he knew the instructor's choices before they were made. Then came the moment. The instructor launched a spinning kick, fast, brutal, the kind that could have broken ribs clean through. But before it could land, the human slid in close, almost under it, and with one smooth motion placed his hand, gentle, precise, against the instructor's spine. The kick completed an empty air. The human stood behind him, hand resting lightly, showing again what he could have done. The instructor froze, breath-catching. For a heartbeat, the entire hall felt suspended in time. Then the human stepped back, lowering his hand once more. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't luck. This wasn't fluke. This was control so complete it felt unreal. The instructor slowly straightened, turning to face him. His chest heaved, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Recognition. He raised a hand not in strike, but in signal. The fight was over. The recruits erupted in whispers, some in awe, some in disbelief. A few couldn't stop staring at the human like he was something alien. The instructor's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then he said, voice low but carrying through the hall, "Class dismissed." The recruits hesitated, unsure. Then, reluctantly, they began filing out, still buzzing with whispers and glances. But the instructor stayed where he was, eyes still locked on the human. The human gave a small nod and walked past him without a word. And in that moment, every single person in the hall knew one thing for certain. They hadn't just witnessed a fight. They had witnessed a warning. The recruits spilled into the corridor like water breaking through a dam. Their footsteps echoed down the steel halls, their voices overlapping in hushed, frantic tones. Did you see that? He didn't even hit him. He could have. Every time, no one moves like that. Some tried to laugh it off, shaky and nervous, the way people do when they've seen something that scares them more than they want to admit. Others walked silent, staring straight ahead, as though replaying the fight again and again in their minds. But no one doubted what they had seen. The human had stood toe-to-toe with their instructor, the man who defined strength and control in their eyes, and he had walked away untouched. Inside the hall, the silence still clung like smoke. The instructor hadn't moved. He stood on the mat, arms at his sides, staring at the place where the human had been moments before. The mop handles still lay discarded on the floor, one of them cracked, splintered, a broken reminder of how it all began. For years, he had tested recruits. He had broken their egos, their habits, their bones when he needed to. He had taught warriors who thought themselves strong what true strength looked like. And yet, here he was, left standing in the center of the training hall with a truth he could not shake. That man hadn't just survived his test. He had passed it in a way that made the test itself feel meaningless. The instructor's jaw clenched. He hated to admit it, but the truth gnawed at him. That wasn't skill alone. Skill could be measured, catalogued, taught. What he saw in that human was something else entirely, something unteachable, something dangerous. He remembered the moment the hand had tapped his throat, the instant another hand had rested against his spine. They were touches lighter than a breeze yet. They landed like thunder in his mind, because if this man had wanted to, those touches would have been the end. And he hadn't even broken a sweat. The instructor drew a slow breath, forcing calm. He had seen fighters from every corner of the galaxy, some fierce, some wild, some disciplined, but none of them had ever done what this one just did. He turned, finally, and walked toward the door. His boots hit the floor heavy, but not loud enough to drown out the storm in his head. Out in the corridor, the whispers spread wider. The human himself walked quietly among the recruits, his pace steady, his expression unreadable. Some avoided his gaze, stepping aside when he passed. Others followed at a distance, as if being near him might somehow explain what they had witnessed. One brave recruit broke the silence. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, voice small. The human glanced at him, expression calm. "Back home, that was all. No lecture, no boast, no explanation, just 2 words. Back home." And those words sank deeper than any answer he could have given. Because if this was what one human carried with him from back home, what else did their kind know that the galaxy didn't? Later, in the mess hall, the talk didn't stop. Recruits huddled in corners, replaying every second of the fight in vivid detail. Some imitated the human's movements, awkwardly trying to copy the sidesteps, the parries. Others argued, saying it wasn't possible, that the instructor must have gone easy on him. But no one really believed that, because they had seen the instructor's face. He hadn't been holding back. He had been tested, and found wanting. Far away, in the instructor's private quarters, the man sat alone. The hum of the ship's systems filled the silence. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands. He had trained for decades. He had mastered arts that most recruits couldn't even pronounce. His reputation carried across fleets. He was the wall that every warrior was measured against. But today, he had stood across from a human and, for the first time in years, he felt small. It wasn't shame, it wasn't defeat, it was something heavier. Uncertainty, because now he knew what his recruits would carry with them. The story would spread, twisted and stretched, told 100 ways and 100 voices. By tomorrow, it would no longer be a mopstick in a training hall. By tomorrow, it would be legend. The human who fought with empty hands. The human who could have killed their instructor but chose not to. The human who moved like he already knew what was coming. The instructor closed his eyes. Legends were dangerous things. They grew faster than truth. They sparked fires no one could put out. And he wondered just for a moment if this was how it started. If one day, when people spoke of the wars and the battles to come, they would point to this hall, to this fight, to the moment when a human showed the galaxy that they weren't just survivors, they were something else entirely. He opened his eyes again, staring at the floor. A broken mop handle lay there still, abandoned, forgotten by everyone but him, and he knew he would never forget it. The broken mop handle should have been swept away, discarded like any other piece of trash after training, but it wasn't, not that day. Someone picked it up, carried it down the corridor, and left it leaning against the wall like a relic. By the next morning, every recruit who passed by slowed their step to glance at it. They all knew what it meant. That stick wasn't wood anymore. It was memory, proof, a symbol of the moment something shifted in their world. And it didn't stay a secret for long. The story spread like a crack through glass. First it traveled mouth to mouth in the barracks. Then it reached the pilots, the engineers, even the cooks. By the end of the week, officers in crisp uniforms were murmuring about it in their mess halls, lowering their voices as if they were handling something too dangerous to speak of freely. Did you hear? The human dropped our instructor in less than a minute. No, he didn't even hit him. That's the part you don't get. He could have. That's what makes it worse. By then, the tale was no longer just a sparring match. It had grown teeth. Some said the human fought with moves so fast you couldn't see them. Others swore he had stared the instructor down until the man froze, unable to act. Each retelling added a layer of mystery, of fear, of awe. The truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that everyone who heard the story believed one thing: humans weren't weak. In a galaxy that had always assumed otherwise, that realization cut deeper than any blade. It reached the Senate halls within a month. A small thing, carried in whispers by aides and junior officers. The kind of rumor most leaders ignored until too many voices repeated it to be dismissed. A Terran recruit, armed with nothing more than a cleaning stick, had humiliated a veteran instructor. At first, the ambassadors scoffed. An exaggeration, a tall tale to boost morale, nothing more. But then the reports piled in, independent accounts, descriptions that lined up, and one senator, older than the rest, asked the question that chilled the chamber. If they can do this with a stick, what do they do with weapons? The room fell silent. For generations, humans had been catalogued, studied, dismissed. Too emotional, too fragile, too reckless, useful in colonies, cheap in labor, disposable in conflict. That was the line repeated in reports. But this didn't fit the narrative. The Threx ambassador demanded an inquiry. The Zelvar scoffed, their golden scales catching the light. You want to investigate a single fight. What will that prove? The Threx slammed his clawed hand against the desk. It will prove whether the humans are dangerous. But no one in the chamber admitted what they were really thinking. That the proof was already there. Back in the barracks, the recruits kept their distance from the human, not out of hatred, not even jealousy, but out of something more primal: respect, laced with fear. He never spoke of what happened. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than any speech. When he walked into a room, conversations paused. When he picked up a tray in the mess hall, the line ahead of him quietly shifted to let him pass. One night a recruit finally asked what everyone else had been too afraid to say. Why didn't you finish him? You had him, why not take the win? The human's answer was quiet, but it cut deeper than any strike. Because it wasn't about winning. The recruit blinked, confused. Then what was it about? The human looked down at his hands, then back at the mop handle propped in the corner of the room, the one nobody had thrown away. Control, that was all. But in those words, the recruits heard something far heavier, because if this was him holding back, then what would it look like if he stopped? The instructor's silence spoke just as loudly. He didn't hold another public demonstration. He didn't mock the recruits. His arrogance, once the fuel of every lesson was gone. He trained them harder, yes. He barked orders sharper than before. But he no longer carried himself like the strongest man in the room, because he knew he wasn't. And the recruits knew it too. Weeks later, a visiting officer stopped in the barracks, curious about the strange energy hanging over the human unit. He asked about the mop, why it was still there, leaning like an artifact against the wall. The recruits exchanged glances, then one finally said, That's not a mop anymore. That's a warning. The officer frowned, not understanding, but the recruits did. Every single one of them, because they had seen the moment the galaxy shifted, even if no one else had. They had seen the line drawn, clear as day, across the training hall floor, and they knew one truth they could never unlearn. Humans weren't just another species. They were a problem waiting to be solved or a storm waiting to break. And no one, not the Instructor, not the Senate, not the galaxy, was ready for that storm when it came. The galaxy doesn't change with thunder. It changes with whispers that build until the silence can't hold them anymore. And the story of the human with the mop handle had reached that point. By the third month, it wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a question. And questions spread faster than answers. Did you hear what happened in the academy? Is it true they took down an instructor? If a human can do that with wood, what could they do with steel? The Senate tried to dismiss it. Too small, too trivial. But the whispers had already outgrown the walls of their chambers. They were crawling through military outposts, crossing into colonies, even threading through the criminal underworld where mercenaries laughed nervously at the idea of Terran fighters. Nobody laughed long. It started with a test. Not official, of course, nothing the Senate could be accused of authorizing. Just a joint exercise, in a forgotten sector of space. A few recruits, a few veterans, a chance to see if the story had any weight at all. The humans were invited, ordered, really. A unit of them pulled from training and shipped under guard. To anyone watching, it looked like another drill, but the eyes that tracked them, the silence in the officers' briefings, told a different story. They weren't being trained. They were being measured. The recruits themselves felt it, the way the corridors quieted when they passed, the way the soldiers from other species sized them up, not with camaraderie but calculation. It wasn't hatred, it was wariness, like watching a storm cloud gather on the horizon and wondering if today was the day it broke. The first test was simple: endurance, a march across a frozen moon with gear twice their body weight. The kind of drill designed to break recruits down, grind them into raw fatigue until discipline was the only thing keeping them moving. The human unit didn't just finish it, they finished it laughing. By the end, their breath steamed in the frozen air, their boots crunching through ice. One human joked about the cold being nothing compared to winter back home. Another teased that the packs were lighter than the sacks of grain he'd carried as a kid. The officers watching from the ridge muttered among themselves, "They shouldn't be this fresh. No one recovers this fast. They're hiding something." But the humans weren't hiding. They were just being themselves. That was the problem. The second test was combat simulation. Zero gravity chambers, no weapons, full contact, a brawl designed to test instincts when gravity and balance were stripped away. The humans adapted in minutes, while the others flailed, kicking and twisting awkwardly. The humans used the chaos. They turned missed strikes into spins, grapples into throws. One even laughed as he drifted past an alien recruit, tapping him on the shoulder before locking him into a chokehold. The simulation ended in record time. The humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving, and the whispers grew louder. But it was the third test that broke the silence completely. Close quarters combat, no gear, no gravity tricks, just raw skill. The same scenario that had birthed the mop handle story in the first place. Except this time, it wasn't against an instructor, it was against veterans. Soldiers hardened by years of war. The crowd packed into the training chamber. Officers, ambassadors, even a few senators who claimed to be inspecting readiness but couldn't hide their real curiosity. The air buzzed with anticipation. The humans stepped into the circle, calm, silent, focused. The veterans sneered, stretching their arms, cracking their knuckles. To them, this was a formality, a chance to crush the myth once and for all. The match began, and it didn't go the way anyone expected. The first veteran lunged, a blur of muscle and speed. The human sidestepped, hooked an arm, and used his own momentum to slam him to the floor. One move, clean, efficient. The crowd gasped. The second veteran came harder, aggression, raw and furious. But the human blocked, pivoted, and dropped him with a strike so sharp the sound echoed through the chamber. Whispers hissed through the audience. The third veteran hesitated, just for a moment. But hesitation against a human was a mistake. Within seconds, he too was on the floor, chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. It was over before it had truly begun. The chamber didn't explode in applause. It exploded in silence, the kind of silence that crackles, that hums with fear disguised as awe, because this wasn't rumor anymore. This was fact. They had seen it with their own eyes. The story of the mop handle wasn't exaggerated. If anything, it had been restrained. The humans weren't just capable, they were dangerous. In the days that followed, the debate consumed the Senate. Control them, recruit them, no destroy them before it's too late. The Zelvar chair leaned forward, scales glittering. You all saw it. The humans aren't begging for recognition anymore. They're showing us what happens if we ignore them. They don't need weapons, they are weapons. The Threx ambassador slammed his mandibles shut, eyes burning. If they rise, they'll challenge us all. We cannot allow it. But even as the voices clashed, another truth simmered underneath. It was too late to stop it because humanity had already drawn the line, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what that meant. Back in the barracks, the humans didn't celebrate. They sat quietly, polishing gear, tightening straps, speaking in low voices. The victories didn't inflate them. They didn't need to. They knew what they had shown the galaxy, and they knew what would come next. The storm was no longer waiting on the horizon. It was here, and for the first time, the galaxy realized it wasn't ready. The Senate chamber had always been a place of noise, hundreds of voices, dozens of species, layered over each other until the air itself seemed to vibrate. But today, the chamber was quiet, not silent, never silent, but tense. Every voice carried sharp edges. Every word felt like it could spark something uncontrollable. At the center of it all, the humans. They weren't even present in the chamber. They were back at the barracks, confined, waiting. But their shadow loomed across every debate, every speech, every vote. The tests had proven too much. Nobody could deny it anymore. Humanity wasn't just another new species. They were a factor, a variable, and variables could break equations. The Zelvar delegate was the first to speak. His voice was cool, steady, like a surgeon's hand before a cut. You saw them, we all did. They don't fight like us, they don't think like us. And that makes them unpredictable, dangerous. You don't control variables like that to contain them. Containment. That was the polite word. The real meaning hung heavy in the chamber. Isolation camps, restricted travel, forced compliance. The Threx ambassador clicked his mandibles, his tone harsh, impatient. Contain them, that is naive. You cannot cage a firestorm. You extinguish it before it consumes the galaxy. But drew a rumble across the chamber. Some nodded, some recoiled. The word extinguish carried its own weight, its own darkness. Genocide wrapped in diplomatic phrasing. And then, against that tide, a softer voice rose. It belonged to the Viari delegate, a species known more for scholars than soldiers. Her luminous eyes scanned the chamber, calm but unflinching. You mistake strength for threat. I saw the humans fight, yes, but I also saw restraint, efficiency, not cruelty. Tell me if they wanted to humiliate those veterans, could they not have done worse? Yet they chose precision, not brutality. The chamber shifted, not agreement, but discomfort, doubt. The debate spiraled, voices overlapped. Control them, recruit them, destroy them. And then, finally, the chamber doors opened. A single human walked in, not an ambassador, not even a high-ranking officer, just one of the recruits, the one who had broken the mop handle. Gasps rippled through the chamber. This wasn't protocol. No human had been invited to this debate. Yet here he was, walking with quiet confidence, his boots echoing against the polished floor. Guards moved to intercept, but the Senate chair raised a hand. Curiosity won out over procedure. The human reached the center of the chamber. He didn't bow, he didn't posture. He just looked around, meeting the eyes of species who had lived for centuries, species who had ruled for millennia. And then he spoke. You've been talking about us like we're not here. Like we don't hear the words you use. Contain, extinguish, control, recruit. His voice was steady, clear, no anger, just truth. You think strength is something we hide. But strength isn't what you saw in that chamber. It wasn't in the tests. It wasn't in breaking a stick or dropping your soldiers. He paused. The silence pulled tighter. Strength is what you didn't see. The choices we made. The moments we held back. Because anyone can strike. Anyone can destroy. But not everyone can stop themselves. The words hung there, heavy, simple, unshakable. The Threx ambassador snapped his mandibles, furious. You dare lecture us in our own chamber? You, but the human didn't flinch. You asked what happens if we're given weapons, if we're given armies. You already know the answer. The chamber froze, because you've seen what we do with nothing. A stick, our hands, the air in our lungs. And if that scares you, it should. But not because of what we can take, because of what we can endure. A murmur rippled through the delegates. Endure. The word struck deeper than threat, deeper than force, because endurance wasn't about winning a single fight. It was about surviving all of them. The human took a breath, then finished. You can try to contain us, you can try to destroy us, But history doesn't remember the cages. It doesn't remember the chains. It remembers the ones who broke them. So you have a choice. Fear us, or stand with us. But make no mistake, we're not asking. And with that, he turned and walked out. No guards stopped him. No voices called after him. The silence was too thick to final. For the first time in centuries, the Senate adjourned without a decision. Because the truth was clear, even if no one dared speak it. The humans weren't waiting for permission anymore. They had drawn their line, and the galaxy would have to decide whether to cross it. The chamber emptied slowly. Delegates drifted out in silence, their escorts trailing behind. No one wanted to speak too soon, not after what had just unfolded. But silence never lasts long in politics. By the time the Senate corridors filled, the arguments began again, this time in whispers, coded signals, encrypted transmissions. The galaxy was shifting, and everyone wanted to be the first to adjust. The Threx didn't wait. Back in their private wing, the ambassador's voice rose to a shriek, mandibles clacking furiously. They dare come into our chamber and threaten us. This is not a species to negotiate with, it is a disease to be cut out before it spreads. His aides, smaller and hunched, kept their eyes lowered. They'd seen this fury before, but never with such desperation woven through it. The ambassador wasn't only angry, he was afraid. Elsewhere, the Vayari scholar ambassador sent a message home, not one of panic, but of urgency. They will not back down, she wrote, and I believe they should not. I will argue in their defense. But no, the tide will rise against them. They will need allies who understand the value of restraint as well as strength. Her people were not warriors, but they had influence in the Senate. And influence could be sharper than steel when wielded carefully. The Zelva remained still. Their elder chair sat in his chamber, scales reflecting dim light, his eyes unfocused. He replayed the human's words again and again, like a blade turned over in his claws. Endurance. That was what gnawed at him. Wars were not won by strength alone, they were won by the side that endured longer. And if the humans were what they seemed, then endurance was written into their very bones. Perhaps extinction wasn't possible. Perhaps even conquest wasn't possible. The thought unsettled him more than the humans' defiance. Across the stars, fleets stirred, nothing overt, nothing official, but orders were quietly adjusted, patrols redirected, intelligence networks activated. Every major power began preparing for a future that had shifted off its rails. And on the far edge of known space, in a modest barracks orbiting a forgotten training world, the humans waited. The one who had walked into the Senate sat apart from the others, staring at his hands. He hadn't meant to become a voice. He hadn't meant to ignite fear or hope or anything in between. He had only spoken what felt true, but truth had consequences. The others trained harder now, not because they'd been ordered to, not because the instructors pushed them, but because they understood what had changed. They weren't recruits anymore, not in spirit. They were representatives. Symbols. Every strike, every drill, every breath they took would be weighed, measured, judged. One mistake, and the galaxy would use it as proof. One triumph, and the galaxy would have no choice but to acknowledge it. At night, when the barracks dimmed, quiet conversations spread. What do you think they'll do? One asked. They'll come for us. Another answered. Then why keep training? Because if they come, we'll be ready. The words carried no bravado, no swagger, just certainty. Meanwhile, deep within the Senate's archives, a different kind of preparation began. Archivists unearthed old records, forgotten files. The last time a species had risen this fast. The last time the Senate had faced something unpredictable. The history was buried for a reason. The galaxy didn't like to remember its failures. But failures had a way of echoing. And as the records spread among the quiet, curious few, one truth became harder to ignore. Every attempt to cage a rising species had failed. Every attempt to crush them had only made them stronger. And so the galaxy split. Some whispered of extermination. Others argued for alliance. A few dreamed of partnership, though they were drowned out by louder voices. No one agreed, but all of them acted. Ships were built, armies drilled, diplomats schemed, spies listened. Because whatever happened next, one thing was certain, the humans would not fade quietly. The recruit finally spoke again, days after his Senate walkout. His voice was quiet but steady, the way it had been in the chamber. They're moving against us. You feel it, don't you? The others nodded. They had felt it. Good, he said. Then we know what has to be done. We keep training, we stay sharp. And when the time comes, we remind them survival isn't what we do, it's who we are. The words weren't shouted, they weren't grand, but they carried weight. Because the truth was simple. The galaxy had declared its suspicion, and humanity had declared its intent. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but every soul could feel the wind shifting, and when it broke, nothing would be the same. The day of the vote came faster than anyone expected. The Senate chamber, usually a place of pomp and ritual, hummed with tension. Delegates crowded their platforms, voices low, eyes sharp. The air itself felt heavy, as if the galaxy was holding its breath. At the center, the presiding voice, being older than empires, robed in starlight, called for silence. On this day, we gather to decide the course of history. The question: humanity, integration, alliance, or eradication. The words echoed through the chamber like a sentence already passed. The Threx ambassador wasted no time. His mandibles clicked furiously as he rose. They are dangerous. They break weapons in their hands as if snapping twigs. They walk into this chamber and spit in the face of our authority. If we allow them to grow, we invite chaos into every world we rule. Crush them now before their spark becomes wildfire. His supporters hissed in approval. But across the hall, the Vaeri scholar stood, calm, deliberate. You speak of wildfire as though it is evil. Yet fire also warms. It clears dead growth so new life can emerge. The Terrans are not a plague. They are a mirror. They remind us of what we once were: hungry, unyielding, alive. If we destroy them, we destroy the very spirit that once drove us to the stars. Her words struck chords, subtle but strong. Some nodded, others frowned, unsettled by truths they'd buried. The Zelva elder leaned forward, scales glinting like shards of night. I have no love for humans, he hissed. But neither am I blind. To strike at them now would not be conquest, it would be war. And war against a species that does not fear death is not a war that can be won. The chamber stirred. The weight of his voice was not lost on anyone. Then the presiding voice spoke again. The chamber will cast its votes. Decide wisely, for once spoken, this decision cannot be undone. One by one, the delegations cast their signals. Symbols of flame, of water, of blade, of shield lit up across the platforms. Some voted for destruction, some for control, some for alliance. And as the tally formed, a truth became clear. The galaxy was divided, not evenly, not neatly, but enough that no single choice could claim dominance. The chamber erupted. Shouts, hisses, translated voices overlapping into chaos. How can there be no consensus? This is unprecedented. They must be eradicated. They must be protected. They must be contained. The presiding voice raised a hand, and silence fell once more. Then the decision is this: no decision. Humanity remains outside our order, untouched, unbound. They will not be destroyed, nor welcomed. The galaxy shall watch and wait. It was neither victory nor defeat. It was something far more dangerous. A stalemate. Back in the training world, the message reached them. The recruit Grant read it aloud to the others. They won't kill us, he said. Not yet. The room was quiet. Relief flickered in some eyes, frustration in others. Then what now? Someone asked. Grant looked at the cracked handle of the mop, still leaning against the wall, a relic of a moment that had changed everything. Now his voice was steady. Now we show them what waiting really means. Across the stars, preparations continued. Fleets expanded, armies drilled, spies whispered, but so did the humans. Every day, they grew stronger. Every day, their legend spread, not because of a weapon, not because of conquest, but because one soldier had walked into the heart of galactic power and refused to kneel. And in the Senate, even the loudest voices found themselves haunted by the same image. A human walking away from their chamber. Unbroken, certain, a line drawn in fire, and the silent question that lingered, unanswered. What happens when humanity decides the waiting is over? The galaxy did not yet know it, but the game had already shifted. The choice they thought they had made was no choice at all. Because survival wasn't something humanity asked permission for. It was something they took, and the echo of that truth would shape the stars for ages to come.